we're going to be talking tonight about, we've been spending a little time talking about, a lot of time, the anxiety of making arrangements and so forth. And I think that we'll be ready to do that. Is this on the, it's not on the,
No.
let's see here. I can see the reflection there, so screen share.
So you're gonna find out tonight. We did. No, we didn't. I know. We're competitive, but trying to competitive. How are you? The house is looking sparkling.
Okay. Change.
You get a whole crew in.
Hi, Terry. Hi, Terry. Hello, Terry. Okay. We're live. Ask her.
Went to the Jewish quarter. My other friends.
Yes. Hello, Terry.
I know. And after having gone to the shoots. There's another way to go sideways. Well, I wanted to see what you're going to happen. I mean, to me, it was I haven't looked at yet, but and then when you're walking down the street, you're thinking about this before or that. And it's just my mind was just. It's
trying to reduce sodium.
okay, but good. It was leaking in the light. I do. Yeah. And also, association. Yeah. The editor, and she would come back from Berlin. So she had.
Munich was fun, but that was a long time ago.
And I like Frank's doing. I've gone through it, but you know, I think also it's who we do work for. But it was just, that was my one day, it was just like.
Isn't he there? Is it because we're late?
I don't know what it is.
It was just really strange because they were. I wish I could your interest.
So, what should happen is that
Yeah, I just was having to turn in my This is part of this tour. It's the MCD. And I just take it as it was there. I just was
And I brought up.
You can go on to the
teacher.
right. But you know, almost any of you want how late is your library?
Until 9.
One time.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello?
Hi, Josie. How you doing? For some reason, pardon? Okay. I'm trying to figure out why I can't get this on the screen.
So what are you seeing?
What I see now is the blue sky picture.
What?
The regular screen thing. I don't. What I see on my screen is not what I see on the computer. Right. What I see on my personal screen is not what I see on the television screen.
Yes. What are you seeing on the television screen?
Just a beautiful picture.
Screensaver.
Screensaver.
Is the picture that's the background of your computer?
Yes.
So hold Windows and press P.
Say again, please.
Hold the Windows button and press P on your keyboard.
Okay. Windows button.
So the Windows
This.
key on the keyboard.
Hold that and press P.
And then should get you
P.
options
Windows
of
button
your
P.
duplicate.
It didn't do it, Josie. Oh, now it did.
Okay.
That works?
Yes, it did.
All right.
Missed call. Something like that.
That's Ivana.
That's who we're supposed to be talking to.
I was surprised I could use it.
Is there anything else you need?
Well, right now my screen went black, and the one behind me is working. I'm not sure why that is.
So now you just see it on the television and not on your monitor.
Correct.
Push that button again. It cycles through a couple different modes.
Okay. Okay, so now I have nothing on the big screen, and I have.
Now do it again.
Okay.
There's four modes. One of them duplicates your screen, the two screens. One of them is extensive, so your screen.
Okay.
One that only puts it to this other thing, and one that only puts it to your laptop.
Okay.
they're both the same.
Now it says public invite.
Okay. Click through that. If you're starting up the Hangout,
Yeah.
so close that and just start the Hangout.
Okay. It's not letting me close. Okay, close it. Okay. Good. And start the Hangout means.
So now, and if you wanted to start recording now,
Yes.
so just say like go live or something like that. So it's blue button with white text. So be near the bottom.
There's a blue camera at the bottom.
Yeah.
You're showing now.
Okay.
You're showing your picture there.
Whoever you want to invite, you'll use the dialog up at the top. You see there's one of the icons, there's like a person with a plus next to them, and that's how you add someone to the call.
Let's see here.
Invite.
Who else?
All I my fan club here.
I'm sorry, I'm kind of in the middle of something. Can I call you back in like 15 minutes?
No.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we'll try to go ahead. Thank you. All right. The purpose of all this stuff is that we want to try to talk about this essay that we people have had for a while. I know that you were trying to read frantically, and I think we're now live with this. And I'm going to actually allow people, as we talk about the essay, I'm going to probably have to turn on the other camera, but also see if we can use this camera that I have that's now pointing at me to have it point at other people as well.
I don't think so, because you don't have something on this side.
I'm going to turn it around.
Oh, okay.
First of all, just a little bit about who the author of this essay is, and then maybe we can then move into people's opinions. Joanna Michlic is, the C is pronounced like a Sadi at the end. Michlic is from Łódź, and she grew up in Łódź. Łódź was one of the places where there was, until very recently, an active Jewish community. And she is a historian of considerable import. The dean of historians about Poland and Polish Jewry is Anthony Polanski. And in my opinion, Joanna, who's a good deal younger, is the heir apparent to Polanski. And she's written a number of very important...
Does she live there or she lives here?
Actually, she is simultaneously a professor at Brandeis University and at a British university. She is currently in England. And she's also, on a number of occasions, been here in Los Angeles because of some of the work that she does with the archives at USC that were started by a filmmaker, Steven Spielberg. Right. Yeah, how quickly they forget. Yeah. One of the things that I think is important to say, and maybe this will start the conversation off, is, were people surprised, especially by the beginning of the essay, where she lays out the context for the study of thinking about this? Because I think, for me anyway, that was something that surprised me when I read it originally, and I wonder if people
can't remember the beginning.
Remembering to remember, remembering to forget. Is that the framework you're talking about?
Right, but just before she introduces that framework,
that massacre. I mean, she opens it with reference to the Jagwab massacre.
Leona, what's the proper way to say?
Yadvabne.
Okay, Yadvabne.
Yeah.
Right. That reference to the massacre is of, I think, the context that I would want to invite people to think about, and that is the period from 1989 to the present, the last 25 years. And here, I think the key issue is that Poland was still involved in what we think of as World War II until 1989. That is, most people think of World War II as having ended with the surrender of the Germans in 1945.
And then the Japanese later.
And the Japanese later. But for that part of Europe, because Poland was occupied by the Soviets, which in Polish language means not the Soviet Union, but really the Russians. And the Russians have been occupiers of what people think of as Poland since 1791. When from 1791 till 1918, there was a partition of Poland into three parts. And there was a small part of Poland that was only semi-autonomous. Essentially, it was under the very heavy tutelage of one of the three people that controlled Poland. So from 1791 to 1989, Poland knew 20 years of independence. That's an important historical framework, because in the minds of many of the people that we think of as our informants, in my case, my mother, in the case of some people, their grandparents, Poland appears as if it were a country that had its own policies and its own direction at all times. And actually, there are at least 4 or 5 major regional differences in what was Poland from 1791 to 1918.
Actually, I read a history last night when I was looking for a map of Poland. And the history goes back even further than that. It's
Sure.
almost as if Poland hasn't been a country until 1989.
1918.
1918.
No, until 1989, it was run by so many different people that it's almost like it hasn't been its own country
Right.
since '89 for all these hundreds of years. It's gone bounced around.
Well, before 1791, Poland was for about a century and a half the largest landmass country in Europe. And what is kind of interesting is that under what was called the dual monarchy, there was a very loose federation that was called Poland and Lithuania.
But there were two monarchs in the country. So it wasn't really like it was its own country.
Right. It's kind of less centralized than we think of a place like France was before the revolution, or England. These were countries that were run by a very strong monarchy. Poland, on the other hand, was, and this is something Poles are actually very proud of, relatively democratic for its time. 8% of Poland was the Polish nobility, and they were essentially the rulers of Poland. And that meant that Poland was very decentralized. But here I want to point out that compared to other countries in the 13 countries that were occupied by the Soviet Union, there was in Poland a tremendous effort at confronting Poland's past. And this is another book that Joanna Michlic has written with a scholar of Ukraine. They did a survey of what happened to all the countries that were under Soviet domination, including that part of Germany, what was called East Germany, after 1989.
Until '89. Oh, you're saying afterwards what happened to them? Okay.
Right. How
Sorry.
did they deal with their past? And that's really the framework in which she describes this remembering to remember, remembering to forget, remembering to profit. Because Poland was one of the few countries that attempted to confront its past. And specifically, it attempted to confront its past around the issue of the Holocaust. And that, in some ways, is the most important aspect of starting with Yadvebna. That Yadvebna is one of the instances where events that happened in Poland were not only done by the Nazis who were in charge, and here we always need to say the Nazis. Is that somebody's phone? Or?
Not mine.
Okay.
Not mine.
Okay. So Yadvebna was one of those instances after 1941 when Poles actually went out to kill Jews without much, if any, help or assistance or encouragement from the Nazis.
And what year was that?
It would be 1941. So that was one of the reasons why when the book about Yadevna that was written by a historian who teaches at Princeton, Jan Gross, when that book came out, there was shock on the part of Poles. Most Poles had no understanding of what went on during World War II, except that there was the heroic Armii Krajowa, the National Army. And that was the first moment where large parts of Polish population had to confront more than the poor Poles were always occupied, always beaten up. As they refer to themselves in their literature, Poland is the Christ of the nations. Most countries, I would suggest to you, would not want to confront their past. If you think about our country here, what happened to blacks and Indians, Chinese, Mexicans is barely thought about in any serious and consistent way. So what we are being asked to think about is what is going on in Poland from the Polish perspective. So I'm just wondering if people have other thoughts about that.
Well, when you say Poland wants to remember its past, what does that mean? That there's more scholars at universities, historians writing histories? Is it that local museums have dedicated themselves to the task of bringing this back? I mean, what does that mean exactly?
Right.
What makes us say that?
So I'm just going to ask you to repeat that question so people can see you.
Oh, yeah. When you say that Poland wanted to think about its past, what does that mean? Does it mean that there are more historians at universities writing treatises on the subject? Does it mean that textbooks in schools are rewritten so that school children are really getting the real thing? Although it'll be either this version or that version, but just the whole idea that they're interested in confronting and dealing with their past. What makes us say that? How do we know that?
So a couple of things. One, during the entire period of the Soviet domination, which begins actually in 1948, and there's a small period of time in Poland from about 44, when the Soviets first come to the eastern edge of what was Poland.
Not the river bank.
Pardon?
Not the river bank.
No, but not far. I don't know what it is. Was it north?
No, you hear it up in that.
Or maybe it's a
glass.
battery in the
I
smoke
know.
alarm.
That's
It's going out.
Okay.
Change the battery.
Beginning in 44, the Soviets began to liberate Poland. From 44 to 48, there was essentially a civil war in Poland.
From what, 44 to 48?
From 44 to 48.
There
There
was
were
a civil war?
civil war, essentially a civil war.
Really?
Because the Soviets are seeking to dominate the system. They are the dominant power, but they're not in control. They're profoundly nationalistic forces that are in the country, and there are old interest farmers party and other parties like that that are seeking to resist the Soviet domination. About 48 is when the Soviets really have control of the country. And one of the things they do is that they begin to write the textbooks. And one of the first things that they allow is a monument about what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. the monument that we think of as the Rapport statue, we'll see that in Warsaw, is really the first and only mention of what happened during World War II. And it's built not so much because the Soviets love the Jews, but because they understand that it will begin to shape resentment away from the Soviets towards the Jewish population.
Towards the Jewish
Or
population?
towards the Germans.
Toward the well, the German population, they don't need to tutor anybody
Right.
in,
Okay.
but
Why against the Jews?
because they're not going to allow Poles to write about what happened to them. And what happened to Poles during World War II is that initially Germany and the Soviets divided Poland, and then the Germans conquered all of Poland, and then the Russians conquered it back. So they're not going to allow that history to be at the fore. So a whole generation grows up where there's at home perhaps a knowledge about what happened in Poland, but it's not in the textbooks, it's not in the official histories. So part of the answer to your question is what is happening in Poland is that for the first time, people are writing the history of Poland.
And when was that they're first starting to write it?
Beginning 1989.
Yeah, okay, because
And what, so that was when Solidarity movement began?
no, that's
Well, so
when they what's his name was gotten rid of the dictator.
Well, it's
when they took over their own country, when they became
Right.
free.
essentially what happens is that Poles negotiate the Soviets out of the country. There are Poles installed in ruling Poland during this entire time, but they are essentially responsible not to the Polish people, but they're essentially responsible to Moscow.
The same sort of thing happened in Germany. I had a patient about 30 years ago who had grown up in Germany during the war. And he was too young to know anything, or maybe he was born just after the war. But in schools, they didn't teach them anything about the Holocaust or about Jews or anything else. Nowadays, and I understand from somebody else about 10 years ago, that they now read textbooks and learn about the Holocaust and what was done. But this was West Germany, this was not East Germany. That they ignored the Holocaust for years after 45. I mean, probably 20 or 30 years. So it's basically the same sort of thing.
I don't think that we learned much about the Holocaust in the United States either. I don't think anybody.
No, I know, but the
Right.
Germans had started the war,
Right.
and the Germans had been at war. We weren't really at war over here, and the German kids were in the 50s, 60s weren't taught anything about it, about what went on. I mean, to me, it was just amazing when I heard that it was totally passed over completely. And I don't remember when we really learned about it, but we were far away. And the Germans were under the control on the west side from us, the British and the French, and on the east side, but from the Russians. So they weren't in control of their own destiny at that point for a long, long time.
So in Jewish circles, Jews begin to talk about the Holocaust in a serious way with the Eichmann trial, which is 1962. So there's this period of time from 1945 to 1962, and it's not like the internet is working at that point.
Right, it wasn't.
You have to read a Yiddish newspaper where there are journalists. You have to read the New York Times, and it is really in that first moment in the 60s that people begin taking seriously the whole conversation about what happened during World War II.
Has Hannah Arendt already written Totalitarianism?
She's just published
She writes
it.
about the Eichmann trial?
It's on the basis of her book, Totalitarianism, which echoes a second book by called with a similar title by an Israeli historian, that the study of totalitarianism is launched at that moment. I'll remember the name of the historian in a moment. So that one of the things that we encounter when we talk about Poland is that the Holocaust happened largely in Poland. That's where the Germans set up the machinery for killing people.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But the history of what happened was not something that was allowed to be written in Poland. So if you lived, let's say, in Lublin, you knew that there was a concentration camp. But what you knew about what was going on in that concentration camp, and it was a killing camp as well. So concentration means you concentrate people. You have factories and you have slave labor. But a killing camp means that one of the things you want to accomplish is killing as many people as possible. So those killing centers, Auschwitz, Majdanek, Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka, there are 8 of them, I'm forgetting the other 3. Those killing plants are places where the killing takes place, and immediately after they kill people, they begin to try and cover over the evidence of it. It's not like immediately after the end of the war, whether it be 44, 45, or even 48, there are large efforts to inform the public about what went on there. In fact, one of the places that we think of as at the center of this is Auschwitz. But the Auschwitz that Poles know about is not Birkenau, but it is the buildings that have the gate that says Arbeit macht frei. In fact, Auschwitz is 7 major camps, and the one that we think of as the place where the nunnery was, where the arch is Arbeit macht frei, in fact had very few Jews.
Really?
The major place where Jews were killed were in Auschwitz II, a place called Birkenau. Birkenau essentially means birch trees. So for all kinds of reasons, like when I went to Poland in 1985, I had to insist that they take me to Birkenau. I said, when they finished taking us around what they show as Auschwitz, they said, the tour is over. Now, we were there with my mother who spoke Polish and 2 of her friends. And I said, tell them that we are not through. And I had brought all these Xeroxes of the plants. I said, I want to know where this is, you know. And then finally they relented. And they took us to what we will go to that, which is where the major part of the killing took place in Auschwitz. But the truth be told, that Auschwitz was unclear. And what I want to say is that this essay is really talking about the fact that for various reasons, the history is unclear to lots of people. Unclear to the Poles, unclear to the Jews. If I were to ask you just as an experiment.
I know what it is.
What is it?
It's the alarm in the house. The battery's low.
Sounds like a battery.
Oh, the battery is low.
Can you do me a favor? And that's.
Tell Josie we've got it taken care of.
It's not singer.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
How many people were killed in Auschwitz?
I don't know. Which Auschwitz?
The Birkenau?
2,
1 million?
yes. But until very recently, most people claimed, including Jewish historians, that it was 3 million.
Hmm.
And that sort of wide, not knowing what actually happened, is part of what became a problem for much of the conversation. So when, for instance, the nunnery was built in Auschwitz I, and Jews protested, how can you build a nunnery in the place where Jews were killed? Isn't it somehow offensive? Nobody in the Jewish community was willing to stand up and say, wait, where they're building nunneries where mostly Poles were.
Right.
Mostly where Poles
Poles were killed.
where Poles were killed,
Right.
where Poles were held, where Poles were killed.
Mm.
And so, yes, when you walk into that building, which is being shown as the center of Auschwitz, that's what you see. You see a big cross, you see the nunnery. But if you know enough, and that began the international process by which Auschwitz II eventually had its monument built, which we'll see when we go. So that's the context for this essay, that after 1989, Poles are trying to come to grips with their history. I think that the second issue now becomes, what does it mean to come to grips with remembering to remember, remembering to forget, and remembering for profit?
The remembering for profit part was interesting.
Okay.
That sort of things Jewish coming into a certain vogue, and it felt as though these Jewish festivals and the music, that there was some profit motive involved there.
Right.
But her point too is that the problem with that was that it just served once again to sort of exoticize the Jew as an alien and exotic sort of figure.
Right.
Which wasn't really helpful.
So this whole question of the exoticization of Jews is, I think, one of the critical things that we will see. You will see it in some ways, and exoticization has with it its pluses and its minuses, as she talks about it.
I don't know if it was in this essay or something else I read, the memorabilia of the Jews.
Right.
How they're making profit on things that they sell all over.
Yes.
Sure.
Oh,
That was
statues
really upsetting,
and
yeah.
figurines.
Have you actually seen them, or would you just
Yes,
read
I've
it?
seen them in Poland.
Have you seen them too?
No, I was sort of surprised when I was there at how I didn't see. There was very little things. There were very few tchotchkes anywhere. I can never say the name of the place where Schindler's List with Kazimir.
Kazimir.
Yeah,
In Krakow.
right. That there's nothing to buy. I didn't see.
Nothing to buy Jewish or nothing to buy Polish?
Both. And in fact, even going to the Jewish festival, usually you go to a festival, you think there's going to be booths and things to take home, and there really wasn't any. They weren't selling anything.
Interesting.
So I was interested in reading that part of the essay, and I think I may have seen one little statue that had the sort of stereotypical.
Yeah, I think I saw them a lot in
religious
Warsaw.
view.
And they're
Okay.
nice little, wooden figurines.
Sounds good to me. If there's less rather than more, won't tempt me so
It's
much.
also- yeah.
But are there also, with the Jewish festival, there's protesting going on too against it? It's mixed, it's not all for profit. I mean, there are people who are opposing and they are in.
But for all kinds of different reasons.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's very complicated.
Yeah, very complicated. But when I was at the Jewish festival in Krakow, nobody was protesting at the festival. Is that what?
I thought that there was some protest.
Were you
I don't know about Krakow.
Oh, yeah.
So there are 103 festivals that have as its theme, as their theme, Jewish culture.
Really?
This was a attempted catalog of all these um, by the Tauba Foundation. And they're a mixed bag, as she describes. There are some of these festivals that are like the Krakow Festival, Jewish music, people dressed up in Hasidic, full Hasidic garb.
But they're actual Hasids that are dressed. They're weren't.
No, they're all actors.
Really? They're all actors?
They're all actors. Now, in the
They're
last
good
year or
actors.
two,
They're just good actors.
last year or two, what has happened is that Chabadniks have gotten involved, and of course, they also are part of the same act.
Okay.
That, I mean, whether it goes on in America or it goes on in Poland, they're not Hasidim that you would meet, let's say, in Hasidic neighborhoods like Borough Park or so forth. They're specifically there to be sort of representative.
Representation.
Yeah, they don't really live there. They're there for the benefit of the tourists. It's sort of like if you've gone to Hawaii and they have Hawaiian culture presentations. The most interesting and most offensive one I found was the one that we went to that was done by the Mormons. Because the purpose of all of Hawaiian history is that the Mormons come and eventually introduce Mormonism.
In Malmet, Moonroos, not Malmet, but Moonroos.
Moons, right.
Cover up, girls.
But you do have Chabadniks all over the world, where they send rabbis to different countries. I mean,
Right. For the
and
purpose of
they're there basically
for tourists.
to feed the tourists and to remind them of their Judaism, basically.
Who, the
Well,
tourists?
Yeah, in China, and they've thrown them out of India. Didn't understand why, because the one that we met was a very nice guy. They're in Southeast Asia and most of the countries there. One guy drove 5 hours to feed us each way.
And so there is that profit motive that Poles have, and there is. Well, I will actually take you to some place where you can see some of the tchotchkes and the dolls. I think it's nice to get off what I call the route that is set up for Jewish tourists. Just as one example, Jewish tourists are generally not taken in Warsaw to see the Warsaw Uprising Museum. You have to know to go. And it's the museum that talks about what the Poles did in 1944 when they tried to liberate the capital of Warsaw. And that was a year and some months after what we call the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. So there are two different events and two different situations. And one of the things that's important about seeing the Warsaw Uprising is to get a sense of what Poles wanted as opposed to what was imposed on them by the Soviet domination. The Soviet army waited on the other side of the Wisła, the Vistula River, until the Nazis had destroyed the Polish resistance. And then they came across the river to chase the Germans all across Poland to Germany. So in that battle, Poles estimate 500,000 people were killed before the Russians came across. So that represents a different moment, and we'll constantly, I think, have to see what's going on in the Jewish world and what's going on in the Polish world. Sometimes they intersect, and sometimes it's like two different things are going on at the same time. One of the questions about this essay is this issue of remembering to remember, which obviously she is
A proponent of.
a proponent of. She gives a definition of remembering to remember that I think is significant. At a certain point, she says something like, when we think about the issue of memory, the notion of trying to get at the historical truth becomes the most important part of these efforts, and that getting at that historical truth is also controversial. That it is something that is also debated. Some of you, I think, saw the movie Ida.
Mhm.
Right. So in a few moments, we're going to ask Joanna Aron, who wrote about Ida, to be the speaker. And so theoretically, we should be able to hear her online. And so what I'd like to do is for us to maybe pause for 5 minutes, invite people to take some fruit and coffee, come back, and I'll get her on the...
Did you find hot cups?
Did I find her question?
Yeah. I can't find them.
Do you want me to run home and get some?
No.
What are you looking for? Actually, I got some.
Hot cups.
Cool for coffee.
This is all my lovely stash.
So there's coffee, tea, fruit, if people like to get up
You
and
know what? How many people are there?
6, 7.
Where is
I'm
Dachau?
just gonna use
Dachau.
Dachau is in Germany. It's near Munich.
Because I went back in 1995 and I went back to the place where I lived. And there was a couple living there, and the woman told me that her father was killed for listening to the private radios. You only allowed to listen to the megaphones.
Wow.
And he died in Dachau, but this was in Bielsko.
Right. So what happened to lots of Poles was that they were worked to death. And Dachau was one of those work camps. So yes, he was from Białystok, maybe?
Not Bielsko, Bielsko.
Bielsko,
Yeah.
in the south.
Yeah.
So he was from Bielsko, but if he was about 2 million Poles were sent into Germany to work.
Really.
Right. I mean, this was not work like what Jews experienced, but it
But
was.
she didn't tell me that. The couple. They didn't say that they were deported elsewhere.
Actually, it was one of those things where people often were ambivalent because there was a hierarchy of suffering.
Yes.
So people who, this is, I believe, Joanna.
Is it Deborah?
She's getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning for it, so I want
Oh
Be
my
sure that-
God, she's a hero.
You're Let's make these air. I want to make the air before.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I'm gonna try to get mild. That's why I wanted to wait.
Oh, right.
But depending on how you go, if I wait, if it's the store, I've never used the store in a while.
Hi, Joanna. How are you?
I'd love to talk to you. Okay, I can do it if I go, I'll be sure. This girl can do it, that is mine.
Right, and so we're taking like a 2-minute break, and we're going to have you enter in just a second. Okay? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
I do hear you, and we're going to have you enter the conversation in just a minute, okay?
See me?
No, we don't see her yet. Oh.
Hi, Joanna. This is Chaim. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to have you enter the conversation in just a minute, okay?
But I don't know how to do this.
I will bring you in,
Okay.
okay?
I have one question to ask you about what you said earlier about the Jews and the festival.
Mhm.
Because, for example, I brought my program. There was this enormous, huge concert in the Temple Synagogue in
Mhm.
Krakow. That was Cantor Yaakov Lemmer from the U.S. They were all. So you're saying these are the Hasidim?
Okay. I don't know who the cantors are.
Because there was a huge. There was maybe like 5 cantors.
Right.
Doing an amazing concert, and the place was just packed.
Right.
And it was packed, with 90% non-Jews.
Right. So,
And people that were just in awe at this concert.
Well, because I think that's part of these Poles who want to recover their history
Right.
and their whole cultural past, which
Right.
includes Jews.
Of course, yeah, and that you don't know what you've got till it's gone. I mean, they have like, it's their,
This is our culture.
this is what they and their parents and grandparents grew up with, the music and the culture, and then suddenly it was gone, and they're at a loss. They're bereft in a way.
Right.
I mean, I sort of felt like I was feeling that in this concert, at the amount that the people in the audience were so into it.
Yeah.
I mean, more so than I was in a way, because I've heard many cantors,
Right.
not quite like this, because there were so many that
Hi.
was amazing.
I'm going to
I'm
use
not sure if
this,
that's what he was saying.
and we're going to have you on the big screen in just a moment, okay?
Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately, I'm not as, whatever I was taught, I'm somehow not up to it yet. So, okay, so I'm going to bring you in on Skype, okay?
Okay, great.
Okay.
So this isn't going out to people?
This person is Joanna, who's on the little screen. She'll be on the big screen in a second. She got up at 3 a.m. in Bialystok to be with a conversation with us. So
Kidding?
no, so
Oh my gosh.
we are going to meet
So
her.
is this somebody, okay, you just answered the question.
We are going to meet her at a certain point in Bialystok, and she's going to accompany us to Yad Vevna.
To where?
To the place where the massacre happened.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
There's going to be a memorial service that we're going to participate in.
So she teaches, she's in England?
No, this is Joanna, not Michlic. It's another one. The person, the author of this book here, describing the one that's right at the.
Okay.
And we could, Barbara, would you mind picking up that book?
This book.
This book, and let's pass it around. I don't know.